Good morning. Nice to see all of you. See some familiar faces. Larry, thank you for coming out in the foggy morning that we have. This fog's been something else, hasn't it? Went to see an old movie last night, and I felt like it should have been a film noir, but it wasn't. It was about a gentleman, older gentleman, who was having his daughter married off, a Japanese film. But it was just so foggy. So anyhow, nice to see you here. Really nice to see you. And Matt, welcome. Nice to see you as well. I see a few new faces here. Sir, I don't know your name. Jan? John. Okay. I'm Steve. Nice to meet you too. Welcome. And I don't think I recognize you either. You are Rebecca. Is that what you said your name is? Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks for returning. Nice to see you. So happy holidays, everyone. We're kind of right in the middle of it, right? It's sort of been interesting. I don't want to say it's disruptive. It's just been interesting. It's going to be Monday, and then next thing we know, it'll be New Year Eve, and we'll be taking the evening off again. So I'm going to be giving a talk this morning that I call "How We Help." How we help. And I'm going to start my talk by telling you a story. It's a short story. It's a very short story. You're going to have to pay attention because it's a very, very short story. But I'm going to start telling you a story. But before I tell you the story, I want to tell you about the characters in this story because they're kind of interesting. The characters are a fella named Layman Pang and his daughter Ling Zhao. Layman Pang, if you are familiar with these stories, you know there are some beloved Zen stories that feature Layman Pang or his wife, Lay Woman Pang. She gets the unfortunate, or that would be the same thing as Mrs. Pang, which is sort of like when I was a kid and I started to realize that in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, there was Donner and Blitzen and Comet. And then there was Mrs. Comet and Mrs. Donner and Mrs. Blitzen. And I went, well, don't they have names? So Lay Woman Pang is Lay Woman Pang, and then his daughter, Ling Zhao. So they're very familiar characters in certain Zen stories. And what's great about this family, the family Pang, is they're lay people. I mean, it really stresses the fact that they're living out this way, not in a monastic setting, which a lot of times when you're reading Zen stories, particularly koans, and this particular story is structured like a koan, a lot of those stories tend to happen in monasteries or at least with monastics. So it's kind of refreshing to have stories that are just about everyday people. And these everyday people are really great because they not only are going about just their everyday life, but they do it with such humor. It's one of the things I love about the stories about the Pangs is that their life has such humor to it. And it reminds me of a family that I grew up with. It was a friend of mine, his family. I remember at one point his mom turned to me and she goes, "Oh my God, we're the Loud family." And I don't know if you remember the Loud family from Saturday Night Live, but as you could imagine, the whole joke was they were loud. Everything they did was loud. And this family, my friend's family, that's what they were like, but it was such joy. And they were laughing all the time. So yeah, they were the Loud family, but you wanted to be part of that Loud family. You know what I mean? They just sounded like they were having a good time. And it always struck me that the Pangs were like that they really were enjoying life. And they lived a life that was observant of the Buddhist way. They were walking the path in their daily life. So that's the characters in the story. It's Layman Pang and his daughter, Ling Zhao. Now, I told you it's going to be a short story, and I am going to ask a question afterwards. It's not a quiz, not a pop quiz, just going to get your take on the story. So that means now is not the time to check out. I know it's easy to check out when you're hearing talks, but now is not the time to do it. So the story is called Ling Zhao's helping. One day, Layman Pang and his daughter Ling Zhao were out selling bamboo baskets. Coming down off a bridge, the layman stumbled and fell. When Ling Zhao saw this, she ran to her father's side and threw herself to the ground. "What are you doing?" cried the layman. "I saw you fall down, so I'm helping," replied Ling Zhao. "Luckily, no one was looking," remarked the layman. And there you go. It's a typical Zen story. Let me ask you this. What do you make of Ling Zhao throwing herself to the ground to help her father? Just what do you make of that? Can't get something wrong. This is just, what do you think about that?
I think this
What was
is
that?
Mike Wallace.
Trying to break his fall? So she could be trying to get between the ground and her dad? Yeah, all right.
Yeah, she was.
Compassion. And how compassion?
I think she was just trying to help.
Up to one moment. Is there somebody who has a comment here? If you can just hold on 1 second. Mary, what was your, it was compassion? Yeah, yeah. So it's a compassionate act showing it's okay. I do it too. Yeah. And then who do we have here? Who's Mike? Go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna say that she was helping him.
She's what?
She was helping him.
Yeah, how so? How do you think?
Well, she threw herself on the ground, so she to make it easier to pull him up.
So that's so she can get better
Yeah.
leverage, or at least in a position where she can pull them up. So you kind
Well,
of look at some of these different ideas. You know, we got some different ideas of helping. Yeah, compassion seems to be probably in all of them, but Mary's was kind of interesting and just sort of, you know, just showing it's okay to fall down. What's that? Protection. How protection, John? Yeah, right. And I think that's what you were getting at as well, Nancy. Yeah, yeah. So that's great. Yeah, exactly right. So I had just read another story about somebody who was at a monastery and somebody was falling down. Right. They started to faint. And so this person ran out to catch the person who was fainting. And so it's sort of like that same sort of thing, compassion showing up. Get yourself in there to kind of help ease the blow. It seems like a very compassionate thing. Anything else? David?
Did you say that it was at a bridge?
Yeah.
So maybe she was falling to keep them from falling off the bridge.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he's going to fall.
Get next to them. Grab it.
Yeah, could be he was going to get wet, or maybe there was a gorge under that bridge. I don't really know. Yeah, so there you go. It's an interesting instinct. Now, in that story that I was telling you about where the person was passed out during walking meditation, what was interesting about that is the teacher, who was right near the person that was going to pass out, smacked the hand of the student that reached out to save the person that was going to pass out. So just know that in Zen, these things aren't always quite as they appear to be, right? So I think these are all interesting ideas. And again, like I said, all of them show at their heart compassion. There's some degree of compassion there. So I encountered this story. I've heard this story a number of times. This is the first time I actually thought much about it. And it appeared in a book that I'm reading right now that I'll probably be leading a study group on called Hidden Lamp. Mary Sullivan had led a class on some of the stories in this particular book. And it's a really good book. And there's commentary. And this commentary is by Joan Sutherland, the Zen practitioner, not the opera singer. And her take on it was that Ling Zhao's action obliterates the idea that there is a helper and a helped. Now, why do you think you'd need to obliterate the idea that there's a helper and a helped? Like, what kind of help is that? Any ideas, Ron?
No.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I don't know. For me, sometimes I'll see a micro move of an eyebrow or something, and I'll be like, ah, they've got an idea. Yeah, Brian.
Helping can be constant,
Yeah,
right? So the helper can, not always, but the helper can kind of put themselves in a position of one-up, in a position of superiority. So obliterating the distinction between the helper and the help goes against that idea that the helper is in some way superior.
yeah, exactly. So it gets rid of this idea that the one who was helped is somehow inferior in some way. And I think my take on this story is somewhat similar to that. I didn't think of it in those terms, though. When I read it, the first thing I went was, well, that's pretty nutty. Throw yourself to the ground. And then I thought, except it kind of, I was thinking about what Mary was talking about. You know, it just seemed to me that there was a degree of, that there was something really kind in it. You know, there was comfort in helping her dad see, you're not alone in this. You know, and I think about how simple that acknowledgement, how helpful that can be. You know, we're all in this. So, for example, I was hiking on a trail many years ago, and I couldn't remember exactly where. I think it was to Eagle Mountain. I think this is where it's up in northern Minnesota. It's a big hill. It's a big hill. And the beginning of the trail was very, I don't know how else to put it, rooty. Lots of roots. And I was constantly tripping. It was like step, step, boom, step, boom, you know, and I was going, my goodness, what a klutz. And then I asked my husband if he was struggling with the trail. And just as I asked, he kind of tripped. And I thought, oh, good. There's some relief in that, that it wasn't just me that was doing this, you know, but it helps us to really understand that falling down is not a mistake. It's not a mistake. And partly what I mean by that is that, you know, we'll do something like trip. And then we'll be like, you know, maybe look around going, oh, that was an aberration. That was an error. That was something that was not supposed to happen. I was just walking and I wasn't supposed to trip. And so we discard the tripping. We discard that moment that we fall down as not really, I don't know how we, you know, how we might think of it, but it's almost as if that didn't really happen. You know, well, that's not really what's going on here. What's going on is you get yourself back up and you're walking again. And so it seems to me that Ling Jia was pointing out to her father that this falling down is not just some aberration, some accident, something you dismiss and you get over and you move on or whatever, right? You do. I mean, you don't wallow in it, but it's not something to just kind of dismiss. It's how reality is showing up, right? This is it. This is where life is right now. You're on the ground. This is where it is. And Ling Zhao is acknowledging that and calling attention to that fact, I think, by throwing herself on the ground. And thinking about falling down and how often we do fall down, just as a course of our life, right? That this is the lot of life, is to fall down. This is how it is. This is how we learn how to walk. This is actually walking. There's a Laurie Anderson song. Laurie Anderson, a performance artist who also records pop music. It's not really popular, so I don't know that it's pop music. But she wrote this song on her first album, which is a great album called Big Science. And she wrote the song called Walking and Falling. And the lyrics, at least for part of the song, are this: you're walking and you don't always realize it, but you're always falling. With each step, you fall forward slightly and then catch yourself from falling. Over and over, you're falling and then catching yourself from falling. And this is how we can be walking and falling at the same time. it just struck me so much when I first heard that. Is this is what we're doing. That this is how we move forward in life as we fall down. We fall, and we catch ourselves, and we fall, and we catch ourselves, and we fall. So it's not an aberration. And in fact, without falling down, there's no life, right? Because how many of us have ever lived a life where it's just perfectly the way that we envision life is going to be, where there wasn't to some degree some falling down, some stepping off the way that we thought things were going to go, making mistakes, or life not going, maybe we put it another way, life not going the way that we expected it to go. This is life. Falling down is life. No falling down, no life. And then, of course, Layman Pong says, luckily, no one was looking, which we might think of as like, now we're just a couple of fools. But I think he means something else by that because of the nature of this story, because this is a Zen story. I think that he recognized the wisdom of his daughter Ling Zhao's action. He saw that it was not coming from her ego. Because again, falling down, even if you fall down twice, you know what I mean? Like, it still doesn't look very noble. And yet there she is. She lets go of the ego. It's not coming from her ego. It's not coming from anyone in particular. This is just wisdom showing up in that action, compassion showing up in that action. And I was thinking about this story. I mean, this story really appealed to me, particularly now, at this time of year, right? Where at least in our culture, this is a time of year where people tend to look at themselves, look at their place in the world, look at what they've been doing in the past year. So it's Christmas. And if you've, now I was raised in a secular household. I didn't know what you called it. I just know that we didn't really have a Bible. We didn't talk about religion. We were not atheist by any stretch of the imagination. If I cursed using the G word, I would be scolded for that. So it wasn't an atheist household. We just didn't talk about religion at all. So for me, this is something I learned from watching Christmas specials, that Christmas is not just about getting presents and eggnog and drinking eggnog, right? So Christmas is this time of year where we think a little bit differently about how it is we're living our life. And the new year, right? A year is ending. And so we kind of look back at our lives and we ask ourselves, well, what have I done? Who have I been this year, right? So we might ask ourselves these questions. How can I be better this year than I was last year? I know I spent a lot of time doing that. I used to do New Year's resolutions. So I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And then I realized that coming up with New Year's resolutions seemed like the whole point of them was just to break them. Because then the next year I would just go ahead and do whatever it was that I made a resolution not to do. But that's this time of year. We take a look at ourselves, and there's a lot of judgment that can go on there when we're looking at our lives and saying, how can I be better, right? And in our judgment, even though we might not see it, in judging what's taking place, we're not really seeing what's taking place, right? It's like falling down. It's like, well, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to fall down. It's because we're judging. We're doing that evaluation that Brian was talking about, right? Why do we obliterate the helper and a helped? So that we don't have that evaluation that's in there. It's not really seeing what's taking place. We don't reject what's taking place. Because when we're judging this moment, what we're doing is we're not allowing this moment to be as it is. We're not welcoming this moment in. We're trying to slam the door on its face, right? We're just trying to go, okay, that wasn't supposed to have happened. Close the door on it. And we try to bring an end to what it is that we don't like, or that we're embarrassed about, or we're ashamed of. And then I wonder, but what about the first precept? You know, the first precept? True nature is clear and obvious within the ever abiding Dharma, not nursing a view of extinction is called the precept of not killing. But that idea of, you know, that didn't really happen. Slamming the door on the mistake that we're making, slamming the door on falling down, is trying to put an end to it right there. Extinction is in that action, in the way we're thinking about that action. Now, I'm not judging it when we do this, right? When we try to close out the error. I don't want to put judgment into that as well. So I'm just trying to describe what we often do. We're living our life, we fall down, and we go, what, but I didn't mean that. We judge it, we evaluate what's right and what's wrong. We try to put an end to the thing we don't like or are embarrassed by. That's just a description of what we do. In fact, in wanting now to be different, if we can allow that impulse in as well, right? That is not wanting it to be the way that it just showed up. As opposed to perhaps saying, well, I do Buddhist practice, so I don't want this to be different. I just accept things as they are, right? So instead of doing that, if we can actually accept that, first of all, we fell down, and then maybe we had the initial, or that wasn't supposed to happen. Take two. Let's do this over again. If we can allow that in, we can see that what we're sensing is, in our trying to reject what's showing up, what we're sensing is that there's more to this than we make of it. It almost doesn't even make sense, but that's what's showing up. And then we say, this is wrong, this isn't right, this was inadequate. We're feeling some kind of inadequacy. We're sensing the inadequacy of what we make of this. But then what we do is we assign that sense of insufficiency of this moment that we have to what's actually happening, not to our ideas about it, not to our sense about what it is that's taking place. So then we think, this isn't right. So just to give you like a daily example, it might be you're driving your car. I don't know if you drive your car like that, but you're driving your car and then somebody cuts you off and then you make a gesture and then you tell yourself, ah, shouldn't have made that gesture to that person. It just cut me off. And then maybe while we're telling ourselves, I shouldn't have made that gesture when that person just cut me off, we come up with another thing we should have done. So what I'm going to do instead from now on is politely wave the person in ahead of me. I'll just politely wave them in. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to say right now, I don't want to judge that. This isn't necessarily a bad idea. We could use more friendly waving and allowing people to do stuff, right? We could stand a little bit more of that, right? But it's an idea that we have. This is what I'm going to do next. And as an idea, it's provisional, meaning that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. It's not going to work in every single situation. And in fact, maybe while you're coming up with this solution, that person that just squeezed in front of you, you're missing the fact that they had to slam their brakes out because the car in front of them had just stopped, and now you're driving into the back of their car because you're thinking about how magnanimous you're going to be the next time somebody cuts you off. Or if that doesn't happen, maybe the next time that somebody's going to cut you off, you see them kind of edging in with their car, you slow down, you wave them in. But they were planning on merging after you, so they just stopped. And now you're stopped and you're kind of waving them in. They don't know what the heck you're doing because they were just going to merge behind you. You're kind of waving them. Now nobody's moving on the highway. And I can assure you that you've gone from helping somebody to actually agitating a whole lot of other people who are on the highway. Right? Just saying, these are possibilities. And so what we're doing, and again, just something to notice, is when we see something that we've done and maybe it's something that didn't turn out the way we expected, right? This is life. We kind of go, wow, I'm not going to do that again. I'll do it this way instead, right? And so we have an idea. That's life. That's okay. It might even be, like I said, it might even be a good idea. But then we kind of get lost in that idea because we've already started to dismiss what it is that's actually taking place. as being an aberration. And we come up with kind of a new rule. When this happens, when somebody tries to do that in their car, my rule is I wave them in. That's the rule that I come up with. If you start thinking about that, you're coming up with we might not think of them as rules, but they're little fixes to the situation. And then if you do that with every single thing that comes your way, how many rules or how many fixes to life is that going to mean you're going to have to remember? Oh, that's right. When this happens, I have to remember to do this. When this happens, I have to remember to do this. When this happens, And so that brings me to another story that I encountered in the Hidden Lamp that I thought was kind of interesting. And it's called, now I don't know how to pronounce, unfortunately, this last name. It's Kabilsingh. I'd pronounce it Kabir Singh. So the story is Bhikkhuni Kabir Singh keeps the precepts. And here's the story. Venerable Bhikkhuni Voramai Kabir Singh was the first Thai woman to receive full ordination as a bhikkhuni. And I just want to point out to you one thing that's interesting about that. She's the first woman to receive full ordination as a bhikkhuni in Thailand. That was in the 20th century. And that was, if I understand the time frame, the latter half of the 20th century that she first ordained. It's an interesting fact. And here's what happened. So as required in bhikkhuni ordination, she took 311 precepts. 311 precepts. That's a lot. That's rules, right? Says a lot of rules. A young man who was visiting her asked, how can you keep all 311 precepts? And I think he's just saying, how can you keep all those in mind, right? Just sort of like what we do with our life. If that happens, then I'm going to do this. If that happens, I'm going to do this. If that happens, I'm going to... How do you keep this all in your mind? She answered, I keep only one precept. And so he was surprised and he said, well, what is that? She replied, I just watch my mind. So you think about all those other precepts, which in our Buddhist tradition, when we take up precepts, we have a lot less than 311 that we take up, thankfully. But when we do that, we talk about them as not necessarily being rules that you follow, but things that can help you see when you strayed off the path. And straight off the path just means when you're acting in a way that's not taking into account the situation at hand. When you're not looking at what is actually taking place. So that's our precept. So 311 ways to help you see that you're not paying attention. You're not watching your mind. You're not really seeing what it is that's taking place. So I just watch my mind. Just watch your mind, right? That's how to help. That's what Ling Zhao was doing and what she was reminding her father in her action. Just watch your mind. Because that's how we help. Otherwise, we're like the person waving the person in on the road and making everybody stop and nobody's moving and you're creating more problems. Right? Just watch your mind. That's how we help. So I hope you enjoyed those stories and that they helped you kind of see something. I don't know if you have questions or observations you would like to share. Yeah, Ron.
Do you think flipping the guy off on the highway, which I guess is ever right action, maybe the equivalent of the Zen teacher slapping a guy's hands or something? I don't know.
I have no idea. So it's not the action itself.
Or should they just accept it?
It's not necessarily the action itself, though I would say that when you're flipping somebody off, if you're doing that, odds are it's coming from the ego. It's coming from, I was doing this, and now you've gotten in that way. But yeah, if you're doing it in a way that's actually intended to be the equivalent of what Ling Zhao was doing, and or like getting smacked with the staff, which is just to bring somebody back, if that's what the intention is, it's just hard for me to see that. and I would also be aware of the skill with which human beings can pull the wool over our own eyes and tell ourselves, well, I wasn't really being a jerk. I was actually teaching this person about being present when I did that, you know. So it's really just, it's what this practice really is about is honesty. So watch your own mind is really just to be honest with what's completely showing up and our response to it, because our response to it is part of what's showing up always, just to be open to that. So the actual act of flipping somebody off is potentially neutral, but it has some violence to it, right? So that's something I would call your attention to as well. You know, somebody was telling me, it was Paul Lundeen. Did you know Paul? Was a practitioner here? Yeah, he used to be the Sunday Morning Dawn. And he was talking about a neighbor who raised chickens and then would slaughter the chickens at a particular time of the year. And Paul was telling me about this machine they had that would shake the feathers off the chicken bodies, you know, just sort of shake the feathers off, basically, in a very rough and tumble kind of way. But and then we were talking about that, and I was grimacing a little bit just at the prospect of it. And he said, you know, I always remember this teaching of Katagiri's. He said, meat is messy. And I thought, what a great teaching. Meat is messy. Just think about that. There's no, you know, we can get on our high horse about meat is this, that, and the other thing, but this is just meat is messy. We know it's messy, much more messy than cooking some lentils up. Now, meat is messy, and violence has that same quality to it. Now, violent action is already messy. So if we're going to do that, we have to be careful with that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, it was a good one. But I do think that the gesture itself isn't the problem. It's where this is coming from, what the intention is.
Well, I guess I'm thinking it's just pure reaction.
Yeah.
Pure reaction is not always bad.
Yeah.
If you're scolding somebody.
Never saying this is bad. Yeah. I'm not saying this is bad. Pure reaction, that's your reaction. That's what's showing up. So what we'll think is, well, I shouldn't do that then. Well, no, yeah, it's not should or shouldn't. It's just happened. Because as you said, it's a reaction. So there you go. And now, what do? So now that's part of what has just shown up. And there's no answer to that. There's not, now you go out of your car, you get out of your car, you apologize to the person, right? There's no way that this looks. It could be that that's going to happen. You know, it could be you're in a parking lot. You know, it's actually sort of like when I was honking at some students that I thought they were just being jerks. You know, I was trying to pull into a parking lot at the school I was teaching at, and I was behind schedule. I had to teach a class, and I was going, I got like 5 minutes to get to my class. And then these students got in front of the stoplight, and the red light turned, or the light had turned red. It was an arrow, and they stopped. And then it turned green, and they remained there. And they remained there longer than I thought was reasonable for, oh, I just missed the light. So I just honked my horn and did it very politely. It was honk. And they didn't move. And I went, honk. And then they didn't move. And then honk. And one of them turned around and kind of gestured at me, and I pointed up at the light. And then they stayed there, and I honk. And I'm really getting upset, and I'm pointing at the light, the green arrow. I got my class that I got to teach, you know. And then what happens is an ambulance came from the incoming lane that I couldn't see. So that's why they were paused there. And then we all got to the parking lot at the same time. And so I had to walk into the building with them, you know, so an apology was an appropriate thing to do, you know, but not always. It's not always going to look the same. But my losing my cool was part of what was going on there, you know. So yeah, it's not about right or wrong. If you flip somebody off, you flip somebody off. You're right. That's just part of the thing now. If you're fully aware, maybe you won't. Do you know what I mean? If you're actually allowing for who knows what. I mean, one of my jokes in traffic situations like that is, well, I hope somebody in that car is having a baby right now. You know what I mean? Like, so you tell yourself some story that'll make it okay, which you don't need to do. But at least you start to open the scene up a little bit, right? You start to say, I don't really know why that just happened, you know, but it just happened. And now we can take care of that. And that's it, rather than start to go down the blame route. You know, who knows what just happened? I don't have any idea. So whatever it is that's showing up, now, so you could be open to that, or you could just do the gesture. Now you just did the gesture. Now that's what's there. So now what? Are you going to keep playing road rage? Right? Have you ever done that where you're driving along in your car, or you've seen people doing that and they're putting their brakes on if somebody's driving too fast behind them? I have a friend who used to do that, and I'm like, you do know that we're all going very fast, and when you do that, you're risking that person hitting you, right? I mean, just so we all know that these are what's at stake here, and is it worth it to let them know you think they're driving a little too closely to you? You know what I mean? But whatever, now that's part of the situation. So if you get rear-ended, now that's part of the situation, right? So no right, no wrong, just what's showing up. But we can be attentive to not attaching to our ideas that might lead us to slamming on our brakes all the time. That guy's too close and this is the way I handle this. Or that guy shouldn't have done this, or that lady shouldn't have done that, or, you know, whatever it is. Those are all our ideas and we get attached to them. If we can start to see, oh, it's not really the situation I'm responding to, it's my idea to. It's a feeling that's arising, and then the narrative that I quickly come up with to explain the situation that I'm responding to. If we can start doing that, I think the flipping off will probably come less often, you know, and not just as a good or bad, it just would probably come less often, I'm guessing.
I'm trying to make too much of this, but it's.
No.
It's on my mind. I guess my point is more than I thought, is more, it's kind of the idiot compassion idea, right? By making that instinctive reaction and going with it, you might be saving somebody's butt in the future from this bad driver by waking them up to that. I'm not trying to justify it, I'm just saying that the to do nothing is not always the appropriate thing in the long run.
Yeah, that's why coming up with good or bad is not the right way to view life. It's just simply not the right way to view life. We had that story that we tell, it's a threadbare story now, but of the wise Chinese farmer. And when we make something good or bad, what we've done is we put a box around our experience. We said, this little thing right here is good. And again, even that is pretty provisional because it's going to be based on our particular perspective. We say that's good. But if we just open the box up, it might have a consequence we didn't foresee. We would say, well, that's not good, right? And then that not good thing could have a good, what we would call a good consequence in and of itself. So suddenly, you know, is it good or is it not good? That's just not how reality shows up. It's how we tend to package it. So same thing with the gesturing. Is it good or bad? Who can say? You know what I mean? Like, we have no idea. You're right. Could it help somebody? Might not. How do we know? I don't know. But you can watch your own mind right there at that moment. And what are you doing? Is it about me? You know, are you sending out those ripples of violence like I was talking about before? Or are you bringing us back? Are you Ling Zhao's daughter? Or are you me driving my car? Yeah. But those are great questions. So it wasn't to belabor. It's a good question. Haley. Frank, go ahead, Frank.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, Frank.
My first initial comment was just interesting how many of our talks and maybe lessons end with just watch your mind. And that's kind of like the only thing we should, if we're going to remember a point, maybe that's it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's it. That's what we're doing. We're really just tending to this. And what we lose sight of is our mind, right? Is the leaning tendency of our mind toward and away from the way we tend to judge, the way we tend to package up a situation, say it's good or bad, or I'm better than that person, whatever it is. That's the thing we tend to lose track of. So just watching our mind, we can see inclination of our mind. That's it. That's what we can wake up to. So yeah, this does come up a lot in talks. So I had a student recently tell me that She's like, oh, I see. So you're just going back to watch your mind. Well, yeah, that's it. And it's simple. It's a simple instruction, but it's challenging for us. Partly because some of what I ran through in my description is how we get a sense, perhaps, of something, but we automatically grab to what's going on. So we could probably sit and talk about what we do in our cars for a really long time because we get caught up in the this, that, and the other thing. And then that has all these details to it. But what's really taking place there in all those stories we're telling, some can be funny, some can probably make us a little angry or whatever, but in those stories, what's really taking place is, our feelings about what we're describing, and our judgment about what we're describing, and the feelings that come from our judgments of what it is that we're describing, and our sense about all of that is kind of showing up all together, right? So we get lost in that stuff pretty easily. And that's why we have the reminder, just watch your mind, because we get so easily caught up in this stuff and we take that to be the truth of the situation when it's just a provisional truth. It could be this thing that's bothering us and they could turn around and that could bother us, or this that's bothering us now could be something that would give us great pleasure in another situation. Sometimes hearing a child screaming, squealing with delight can be just a great joy. I was just out recently and I heard some child, blah, and I was going, oh, what joy. But then there are situations where that's just not joyful at all. You don't want to hear that, right? So it's not the thing, again, we get caught up into things. They're showing up all the time and it's easy to be hooked to it. And then that becomes what we think is actually taking place. And it's taken place for sure, no doubt about it. But the whole picture is more than that, right? And so the irritation of that or the joy in that is very provisional, right? And it's coming in part from our leaning minds, right? And there's joy that can come from not. There was a moment this morning when we were resetting this room where it was totally silent. There's just and there was, for lack of a better word, there was joy in that. Quietly removing chairs from the room. There was just joy in that, not one way or the other as well. So there is joy that's not leaning mind too. But just watching how often we get caught up in the scenery of our lives and then make all kinds of narratives and blame or give credit for stuff that doesn't ask for credit or doesn't ask for blame. So thanks for your question, Frank. Did that answer your?
Yeah, more of a comment. I
Yeah.
also just saw another quick video of these two philosophers kind of debating, and they were using bigger words, good versus evil. One was coming from the Abrahamic religions, so he was using the framing good versus evil in this world. And then the other philosopher was more of Eastern philosophy, so Buddhism, Hinduism kind of guy. He said, well, we don't use those kind of framing as much. We use wisdom and ignorance. And it just, I knew the lessons, but having those two compared with each other, just realized that, yeah, I do agree with the wisdom and ignorance take on this distinction. I like that much better.
Yeah. It's more open to what it is that's showing up. It doesn't interpret something and then they have to cut off so much that then becomes part of the conversation about what's good and what's evil. Well, if you kill somebody, but this was going on, is that evil then? You know what I mean? Then you have to sit there and do all this, because when we're putting those frames on there, we're boxing something out. Which again isn't to say we don't go through life saying this is good, this is bad. Do you know what I mean? We do that. I think as a culture, we'll agree on what we think is good, stuff that we think is bad. But we got to make sure that we realize that's provisional, that it's just a boxed up way of looking at what's taking place. And that sometimes the stuff we think is bad might have completely understandable conditions in which that's arising that might, in our mind, make it less bad. It might not. That actually doesn't matter at all. We can just see that there's more to it than good or bad or good or evil. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Steve.
From who? Mary? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
Hi. Looking at your mind, sometimes your mind is so full of extraneous thought or trouble, and you can't find a way to look at it, sort of like it's buried. But what works lately anyway, is turning to a teaching, and maybe even randomly, and trusting that there'll be some insight there. In other words, it's good to be able to look at your mind, but if you can't, it's really, to me, critical to pick up Katagiri book or listen to a talk right in the middle of the confusion, and let the teachings suggest some kind of insight. That's just what I'm thinking, because just me walking down the street looking at my mind, sometimes it's pretty hard to get anywhere. It's just a thought anyway. I made a little booklet of these teachings, and I go to it, and it's odd that just one insight of like joy is here or something, just something simple as that was like, oh yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's just something I thought I'd throw in.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary. I love that idea of our mind so full of stuff sometimes that we can't really see it, because it's not really like we're taking our mind out and looking at it, right? But noticing just that, I totally know what you're saying when you're talking about that, or it just seems so overwhelming or whatever. And so it's just kind of like a feeling, and you can't quite get at whatever that thing we might think of as looking at our mind is. But it sounds to me like what you're really doing is you're looking at your mind. You're feeling that unsettledness in those teachings. If I hear what you're talking about, Mary, that's what our teachings do. They're bringing you right back here. Okay, so you look at a passage from Katagiri, and what's that doing is it's grounding you back to this. And that is watching. We can get rid of our mind, and that's just watching mind, right? That's just tending to what's showing up. And that's what those teachings are doing, is they're just bringing you back. They're like, there's I don't know, we'll call it a tool that people use sometimes to bring themselves back to the present. And they're gathas, they're little sayings that people have when they're doing something, and you say it while you're doing it to help you bring yourself just back to the moment so that you're not lost in daydreams. So it might be, I don't know, a little poem about opening your car door or a little poem about filling up the sink with warm water, whatever that is. But that poem, you recite it, just a short little thing to bring you back to the present. And it sounds like that's what those teachings are doing. But just know that even that sense, I can't see my own mind, there's too much in there. I totally know what you're describing there. And that is actually seeing your mind. That's watching your mind. That's realizing that you're getting caught up in something. What it is, you can't quite tell. And you're using the teaching to bring you right back here. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Rick.
I think it was that on.
One moment, he's got a microphone.
I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh that said, when you drink tea, drink tea.
Oops, what did he say?
He said, when you drink tea, drink tea.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's just the practice itself.
Yeah.
Cooking your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, and that's easy for us to neglect. Even when we're drinking tea, it could be, I had this stuff, listen to me. You can tell I'm not a tea connoisseur, but I was at a Thai restaurant that's nearby, and they had white tea, and it was very expensive. And when I drank it, to me, it tasted like water. And so that was like going through my mind going, I can't taste this tea. I mean, did they put enough, so now you're not drinking the tea anymore, right? You're evaluating. Very easy for us to do, or daydream, especially if it's our ritual to drink tea, I don't know, in the morning at 10 o'clock or whatever. And then suddenly we're drinking the tea, and then what do? We kind of drag the newspaper over. Suddenly you go, oh, interesting, and we're not just drinking tea. It's so easy to pull ourselves off, but that's a great teaching. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, Ron. Yeah, no problem.
This is my mind just is somehow it's caught up on the side.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm trying to justify flipping off people in my previous life or something. But I'm sure I heard the story here and it just comes to mind, or in one of your books or one of Steve's books about the monks are out hand feeding the young deer, and the teacher comes running out with a baseball bat or whatever, and slams the deer so that the deer runs away. Oh, maybe I didn't hear that story yet.
Oh, I haven't heard this one, but I like it.
The teacher's intention, of course, he didn't want the deer to become tame to hand feed
Yeah.
people, because people down the street would shoot them
Yeah,
and eat them, right?
yeah.
So, but there's a calculation there, right? I mean, the teacher made a calculated decision in a hurry that
Yeah.
was worth doing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so going to the story of the woman falling, was there a calculation there that she had an intention to do? Yeah, but anyway, that's all.
Yeah. Calculating mind shows up. It's how we get through this world. So again, when we're doing that, we just have to realize calculating mind is showing up, which doesn't mean judge it. It doesn't mean do it. It doesn't mean don't do it. It just means be aware. That's watching your mind, just being aware that's what's showing up. It might be, again, as I said before, some of the rules we come up with or some of the ways that we evaluate a situation are provisionally helpful, right? That is in the situation. So now, was that teacher right? Is that the right thing to do? I don't know. He's going to find out. But at least there was something, right, that teacher was trying to do. So yeah, it's not necessarily about whether you're calculating or not. But as long as he can understand that hitting that deer might not have done anything other than hurt the deer for that moment, then that's what it is. Just chases after it. Yeah. Yeah.
The one I read had a big.
Yeah. But same idea, or to terrify the animal. Do you know what I mean? We can see terror. All I was doing, just innocent little me, I was out on a bike ride once, and I saw out on a field mother deer and her fawn. And the fawn was starting to get a little bit older. And I just stopped to look. And she was, she was far away. She wasn't like close. And she looked and she couldn't tell, that thing where deer, where they're looking or they're going, is there something there? And they're kind of smelling and she's wiggling her ears a little bit. And then she had this look of just sheer terror. And she ran right toward me. And she did not hit me because I don't think she intended to run toward me. I really think that was an error, because when she got close to my husband and I, then the terror almost doubled and she kind of ran around us, right? So it could just be terror rather than the pain, but who knows? I mean, it may work, it may not work. Again, that's just the situation, whatever shows up next. Now there's the next situation. So calculating mind, not bad. Just be aware calculating mind is showing up. And calculating mind then is definitely in a realm of, ideas. I'm going to do this because this is the result I think is going to take place. And the real answer to that is maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? Who can say? But nothing wrong with trying it if you think it's going to help. Yeah, absolutely. Whew, that was a lot of conversation. That was great. I really appreciate that. We got a few more minutes if anyone has anything else they would like to add. Yeah, John. And this is for our folks on Zoom so they can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lately I've been finding myself mindfulness and mindful of where I'm at, my surroundings, Mindful of people I talk to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm having
Oh.
problems actually. Your register, it's just the register of your voices.
I said I've been mindful of everywhere I've been, like where I go, who I'm in contact with. I'm very mindful and I think about before I talk.
Yeah.
So that's how I got there.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. We do those things and it's important to do that, to think about who are you spending your time with, right? And before you say something, a question you might ask yourself is before you say something, and I'm just saying it as somebody who's a smart aleck. I grew up kind of being a smart aleck. That was my job, you know? And so then my calculation was, is this going to get people laughing? So can I get this room full of people to laugh? And it wasn't always the right thing to do. It would sometimes anger the person I was making the joke about, for example, which probably meant it was hurting their feelings, actually, but to ask yourself, is this going to be helpful for what's going on, right? Is a very useful question. So yeah, I think, taking a pause and thinking about whether or not to do something, that's perfectly fine. But again, we want to think that when we're making some kind of conscious pause like that, we just want to be aware of the fact that we're making a calculation there. And we could be right, we could be wrong. It might be the right thing to say, but it might be a point where we think not saying something is the right thing, and then we realize we should have said something, or vice versa. So it's just being okay with what shows up next, and then maybe making that calculation again. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have to, or we should, if we want to live a conscious life, we need to really pay attention to what we're doing and ask ourselves, is this appropriate? Is this the appropriate thing? Sometimes the appropriate thing just happens, it just, we know it's the right thing to do. The story you'll often hear is a child walking out in front of traffic, pulling that kid back, whether the kid starts crying or not. You know what I mean? That's just the appropriate response in that moment, just to do it. But sometimes we have to think about what's going on and ask ourselves if what we're going to contribute is going to be helpful or not, so, yeah. Thanks. All right, we're at 11. We've been chatting for about a half hour, so thank you all so much for your questions and observations. I really appreciate it. And like you said, happy holidays. New Year's coming up, so happy New Year. See you in 2025.